Hello, and welcome to Creepycore and Folklore, the show about creatures, encounters, old tales, and myths. I'm your host, Iona Wayland, a dark fantasy author, mental health professional, and overall curious person. I want to join other spooky souls and hear about these unusual stories. Hello, spooky soul. I'm so thankful for you tuning in. This week, I guess we're on episode 6 now, and I've decided to dedicate this episode to the Bell Witch of Tennessee. It's cool because I had never heard of the Bell Witch before. I posted something on the Creepycore and Folklore Instagram. I was posting about summer thunderstorms because I love summer storms. They're so beautiful and like kind of scary and just full of this like electric energy. And so I really, really like them. And one of the, I guess, prompts or things I talked about in the caption was like any suggestions from anyone about what I should do my next episode about. And at Irish Cupcake 94, Lauren, I believe, or Lauren, depending on how you pronounce it. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Said that maybe I could look into the Bell Witch of Tennessee. And I thought that was really interesting because I'd never heard of that. And I also thought it was cool because I actually have a sibling who lives in Tennessee. And so it's something that I can talk with her about. So I am excited to dive into this creepy tale because it is honestly, it really creeped me out. I was while I was researching it, there was another thunderstorm, of course, so I was already like, ooh, like in the spooky mood. And while I'm researching and my baby's asleep and my husband's asleep and I'm just there like I almost said by candlelight as if I don't have electricity, but I was there with just like my little lamp in bed, just like researching all these creepy things, and like with thunder going and stuff, it just like really freaked me out. And so I'm really happy. I naturally, once I was freaked out, wanted to share it with you. So this story takes place in Robertson County in the early 19th century. It depicts like the Bell family and their farm. And there's like a story or legends that surround it. Even to this day, it's still talked about. So John and Lucy Bell lived on this. It's really interesting because I read that it was 1,000 acres, but another one stated that it was 350 acres. Either way, that's huge acreage for a farm that like gigantic. And they had children there named Jesse, John Jr., Drury, Benjamin, Esther, Zadok, Elizabeth, who went by Betsy, Richard Williams, and Joel Egbert. I have to say that I really like, so I love looking at names. Well, one, I'm an author. I mean, in case you didn't know, I'm an author. And so I love looking at names. And I have to say one of the funnest things about, probably the only fun thing for my particular pregnancy was looking up names to name the baby. And it was just neat because out of all these 9 children, I really liked the name Drury because it reminded me of the "Do You Know the Muffin Man" scene from Shrek. From Drury Lane, like the Muffin Man who lives on Drury Lane. I also like the name Esther. That's such a strong femme name. It's so powerful. I love it. Joel is cool. And then Zadok I thought was interesting because I actually had never heard of that name before. So I kind of wanted to look up what Zadok means or where it came from. I'm going to deep dive that real quick, actually. So it turns out that the name Zadok means righteous, and it was originally Hebrew for just or righteous, and it was the name in several biblical figures as well. So I thought that was cool. I don't think it's that common. It's definitely one I hadn't heard before, so I think it's cool that it just sounds like an old name. But so they built this home John Bell built this home for Lucy Bell, his wife, and all of his children. It's really close to the Red River in Robertson County, Tennessee. I also have to comment that there was a lot of family drama, like outside of the whole haunting experience that I'm going to get into, where like there are different people who had like multiple marriages, which like, who cares? But back then, this wasn't common. And so I kind of wanted to read some of the tea about this family straight from the article. I got this article, the main one that I use that I'll make sure I include in the show notes, is by the Tennessee State Library and Archives. But it was just really interesting to read this. So, of their children, Benjamin died as a young child. Zadok became a prominent lawyer and moved to Mississippi, where he also died relatively young. Esther married Bennett Porter in 1817. Jesse married Martha Gunn, daughter of Reverend Thomas Gunn, and later moved to Mississippi. John Bell Jr. married Elizabeth Gunn, Reverend Thomas Gunn. So isn't that like, it's like siblings marrying an opposite family's siblings. And he became a successful farmer in Robertson County. Drury never married and owned a farm in the north side of the Red River. Elizabeth, also goes by Betsy Bell, eventually married her former teacher, Richard Powell, and moved to Mississippi. Richard Williams Bell was married 3 times to Sally Gunn, daughter of Reverend Thomas Gunn, Susan Gunn, daughter of Reverend James Gunn, and Eliza Orndorff. Like, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm not going to do it, but you just think on that. He lived out his life in Robertson County. The youngest child, Joel Egbert, married twice and moved to Springfield. So like, listen to all of these like marriages, and it just makes me speculate about, you know, what the heck was going on. But, you know, knowing that this happened like close to 200 years ago, if not more than 200 years ago, definitely makes me even more excited to hear about like the gossip or the chisme related to these folks. But now that I'm finished, you know, gossiping about a 200-year-old family, let's get into the legend. So people are unsure of how it began. A little bit later on, I'm going to go over where the different thought processes are related to like how this legend even started. But part of what freaks me out a lot, which I'll get into later, is that like there kind of isn't a reason for it that it started, and so like this could be potentially true. Like it's enough reasonable doubt for me that I'm like, I can't see a clear delineation between A and B, and this could have actually happened. So some say, according to legend, that the spirit actually said, and this is a very vocal spirit, you'll hear later, but the spirit actually said, I am a spirit. I once was very happy, but I have been disturbed and made unhappy. I am the spirit of a person who was buried in the woods nearby, and the grave was disturbed. This is a bit of a redundant ghost here, but you know, bear with me. My bones disinterred and scattered, and one of my teeth was lost under this house. I am here looking for the tooth. So this also makes me want to look into like tooth fairy mythology. I'm gonna note this down. But another quote that some say how it started was that the spirit said, I am a spirit from everywhere, heaven, hell, the earth. I am in the air, the house, any place, at any time. I have been created millions of years. This sounds so cool. It is such a vibe. I'm definitely inspired by this line, and I'm going to try and incorporate it into my next book, to be honest, because this is cool. I mean, this is horrifying, especially because seems like a malevolent entity as we go forward, but this is already creeping me out. So there were many disturbances. It started out pretty tame-ish, if you can even call it that. And then it escalated as the family tried to ignore it. So the very first instance that was recorded was that John Bell fired a shot at a dog-like creature. And you know from episode 2, if you listen to it, that already freaks me out. The dog-like creature, and it just, ick. Drury and Betsy both started seeing strange creatures near the property. I'm already getting goosebumps again. Oh my goodness. It is clearly very easy to freak me out and scare me. I am very spooked by the thought of just along the wood line seeing dog-like creatures. No, absolutely not. Then the sound started to pick up inside the home. So Betsy and Drury and John, the dad, heard knocking from within the home and windows. This actually happened a lot in our old, this is me interjecting here, but a lot in our old farmhouse in Appalachia. I mean, I still live in Appalachia, but in our old farmhouse, we would hear knocking and walking and so and I actually have an episode about a bonus episode from my own home that you can listen to if you're interested by signing up for the Spooky Soul email newsletter. I send them out once a week. But if you're interested in like house haunting type things from like my personal stories, then you can sign up there. And I'll also have a link for that as well. They also started hearing flapping of wings against the ceiling. This is very, very horrifying to me, especially because there's no sights of this creature or creatures yet inside the home. And they have to imagine this being or these beings based on the sounds they hear. And in my opinion, it's much worse to like imagine what something looks like and just hear the sounds and have your imagination fill in the blanks. Like that is much worse than seeing the entity, because you really don't know how to size up what you're looking at, like what you're dealing with, like when you're only basing it off of the sense of sound. I also am a little confused as to why the description of witch is used here when a lot of the quotes that I'm hearing are using the word spirit, and then eventually it changes into witch. So I'm not sure. And it kind of like, to me, sometimes sounds like there's more than one entity here, but who knows? I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know what I'm talking about, but that's just me speculating here. There would also be sounds of rats gnawing on the bedposts and the sounds of choking and strangling and gurgling on the floor. There would also be the sound of chains dragging and heavy objects hitting the floor and the walls. Sometimes there'd be the sounds of beds like being splintered, pulled apart, and dogs barking and fighting. But when they went to go check the source of all of these noises that I've listed here, there were no indications that any of these things were actually happening. There were like no chew marks. There was no splintered wood. There weren't any extra dogs other than the 3 family dogs. Like there was nothing that showed that any of the things they were hearing as a collective family was actually happening to them, which makes it, again, in my opinion, that makes it worse. So the family at first did not speak about it, even to each other. Like they definitely didn't share it with neighbors or friends of the family, but they also avoided discussing it to each other. So as I mentioned before, it was mostly sound, but then it shifted and became physical. Joel, Richard Williams, and especially Betsy, like poor Betsy. Betsy was the worst off apparently out of everyone, or of all the children, I should say. They were struck, pinched, and had their hair pulled often. There were like marks that they could visibly see. Like this is the first time where there was a visual with it, that they could visually see like on their body. Now, what's interesting is not only did we go over like, so for the children, Joel and Richard Williams were messed with. I mean, everyone in the family was kind of messed with, but Betsy, out of the children, Betsy was the worse off. And out of the parents, John Bell was the worse off. However, there were 2 people in this family that the spirit didn't mind and didn't mess with. One was Lucy Bell, that's the mom of the family. And it was apparently declared by the spirit that she was, quote, the most perfect woman living, unquote. And if she became sick or ill, it would sing to her, which, like, I don't know which one's worse. Would you rather be hit on by a ghost, or would you rather be beaten up by a ghost? I don't know. That both are very scary imaginings to me. Like, both are very difficult positions to be put in. The other person that was spared was John Jr. It's also very interesting considering how it's the second, like, child, and it would torment the father. Because at first I was like, well, maybe the ghost is in, like, I don't know, I'm speculating on a ghost's sexual orientation, but like maybe they're into like women. But this ghost didn't flirt with John Jr., but it would have long and intense conversations with him. And even though John Jr. had like a philosophical rapport with the spirit, he was still resentful of it and called it damned. Like, he was like, there's something like this spirit is messed up, or this witch is damned. I also find it interesting too, because it tormented the father. He's the second born child, but oldest of like the boys. He's the oldest son. So I thought that was just very interesting, because I can't follow the logic here is what I'm saying. It also would not, like, it began to not be just limited to the family. It would also affect others. So at one point there was a visiting friend, William Porter. He reported that it got into bed with him, and he tried to catch it with his pajamas. And he said that his goal was to catch it and throw it into the fire, but he said it became really heavy and that it smelled horrific, and that caught him off guard. And so it actually ended up escaping, but I can't believe he caught it. I'm like, this guy somehow like was able to capture a ghost. Like, and when you hear a little bit more, that's like pretty impressive. Another thing about this that I didn't realize until I researched the family a bit later was that they actually owned slaves. And that's already really awful, like just beyond words awful. What makes it even worse is that apparently this spirit would torment the slaves, especially one. Like, I don't know why it singled out particular people in the family or particular slaves that were just trying to survive this point of American history. But there was this one slave named Dean, and it appeared to him several times. And when it did, it would appear as a large black dog or wolf. And it sometimes had two heads, and it sometimes had no head. No, I cannot do that. It's already very upset. I have goosebumps again. This is really like pinpointing my particular fears here. And so he claimed once that he was even turned into a mule and was attacked before being transformed back into being a human. This is also interesting to me because it seems like a trickster and an illusionist or something. After that, he always, like after the mule incident, he always carried an axe and a witch ball. I really don't know what that is, but his wife made it for him for protection. And I just feel like this is such a power couple. Like, here's this guy who is just like trying to survive. He somehow was able to find the love of his life, which was his wife. She is unnamed here, but she was able to come up with like a protection spell or a witch ball, so to speak. I'm really going to have to look up what that is because I've never heard of that before. And also he's like, I'll just bring this axe with me. You know, thumbs be damned if I get turned into a mule again, but I'm going to try and protect myself. And I think that is so cool. Like, they are such brave people. This is interesting. I just did my deep dive thing again that I do in my neurodivergence ways where I veer hard left to get more information about something. But apparently, according to Wikipedia, a witch ball is a hollow sphere of glass. Historically, witch balls were hung in cottage windows in 17th and 18th century England. So I think that's interesting because this is the one of the southern states of the US, but they're used to ward off evil spirits, witches, evil spells, ill fortune, and bad spirits. So I bet you that's why it worked, because it sounds like after that incident, and after his wife made the witch ball, it didn't bother him anymore. So that was cool. Also, apparently, because they had the Bell family had extensive land, there were also like some thoroughfares through it. So like places where people would travel, and they had to travel along the property, but the Bell family didn't care. And apparently the three family dogs, Caesar, Tige, maybe? Tige? Tige? I don't know. And Bulger. Bulger, Bulger. That's hilarious. These are the most ridiculous dog names, and it's so funny because even today I've met like a million dogs named Caesar, so I think that's really funny. But anyway, they chased off the family Shakers off of the farm. They acted like they were possessed, apparently. That particular anecdote from this legend seems a little silly to me, because if that's the case, then my dogs get possessed every week or so for the mail delivery person because they will not stop barking. So I don't know if that was just how their dogs were. Like, farm dogs can be kind of aggressive depending on what their job is. So if they were like, felt like their job was patrolling, I could see where they would be like, this is my job, and they'd just like run the Shakers off the farm. Another person that this spirit terrorized was Bennett Porter. He actually is a neighbor of the family and became the future husband of Esther, but he shot at a knotty log. This whole story sounds kind of odd to me, but he shot at a knotty log that had materialized, but then the log, like the bumpy log, disappeared, and when he inspected it, it only like it had vanished in front of his eyes, and when he went to go look at it, there was just a bent tree and a bullet hole behind. So I thought that was odd. I don't know what that means. That's a type of materialization that seems unfamiliar to me, so I'm not sure what was going on there, other than maybe it was like tricking him. There was a guy named Dr. Mize, or Mize, Mize, who tried to exorcise it, but he was mocked, and then he was scared away. Andrew Jackson, who I don't even like saying his name. He was such an evil man. He, for those that don't know, he is the creator of the Trail of Tears. He was very anti-Indigenous, and absolutely like it was like a mass genocide of Indigenous folks. And somehow he's on the $20 bill. I don't know why that is, but I don't care that he was haunted. I'm bringing up this $20 bill, bro, because he got a big brunt of it. He was traveling through on the Bell land, and his wagon and horses got stuck in what was absolutely nothing. Like, there was no mud, there was no sticks or gravel in the way. They were just stuck and unable to move. And it's reported that he and his men could hear the spirit laugh and say it would harm him and haunt him and his men that night. And sure enough, like, they prepared at their campsite. There's a self-proclaimed witch hunter in the group, and he armed himself with a gun and a couple silver bullets. But when they heard like feet skipping and jumping around, and finally what seemed like an invisible entity entered the tent or the cabin or wherever they had taken up residence, the witch hunter tried to shoot it, and it made the gun not work, like get jammed up, and it made the man feel like pricked with tons of needles. Like it felt like a whole side of him was being pricked with needles, and he reportedly was like grabbed by his nose and like thrown around or like yanked around by his nose, and so he ended up running away. And the spirit was like, you basically like, you can't kill me, and people like are afraid of me, and I'm going to come back and haunt you. And so the next morning, like an early morning, they ended up fleeing to Nashville without staying there another night. But if we zoom back into the original like Bell family, the two people, like I was saying, that were the most tormented are Betsy Bell and John Bell, the dad. So Betsy Bell was consistently physically harmed, and even when she tried to sleep over like off of the property at like her friend's house, which this is another cool name alert, Theny, I guess it said, or Tenny maybe, Theny. So I'm going to say Theny because there's alliteration here, but Theny Thorne was her last name, so I think that's cool. But Theny Thorne, she offered like for Betsy to stay with her for a couple nights so that Betsy could get some respite from the ghost. But even at her friend's house, there was a banging on the door, and the door like swung open, and the spirit reportedly said, "You should not have come over here. You know I can follow you anywhere." And that is just so haunting to, like, again with the freaking goosebumps. Man, I'm so easy to scare. But that's just so like such like gross stalking behavior. Like that is like upsetting, and you can't do anything about it. That's like really gross. It's like so predatory. It even reportedly disapproved of her childhood sweetheart. So she and Joshua Gardner had been in love for years and years, and they had courted, and Joshua even proposed to her, and she apparently like kept pushing back the wedding date because the spirit would constantly say like how much he did, like she would never be able to leave the home, and that he didn't like Joshua, or that the entity didn't like Joshua, and that it would make certain that she and Joshua Gardner would never be wed. And because of the spirit, they apparently called off the wedding eventually. She could not escape the haunting until she actually married her former school teacher, like I talked about before, Richard Powell, and they moved to Mississippi, and apparently that's when it stopped for her. But like that sounds like it was into her adulthood. Like it started in childhood up through adulthood. Like that's crazy. Specifically focusing on John Bell, the dad of the house, the spirit constantly threatened him with death and would say how it was going to kill him. And apparently the spirit would constantly call him, quote, old Jack Bell. Even though he didn't go by that name, that's what the spirit would call him, is old Jack Bell. And it would make him sick. Like several times in his life, it was like, hi, I made you sick. And it would make him bedridden. However, one of these times when he was super, super bedridden, like couldn't even stand up, John Jr. was tending to him, and he tried to care for his dad, but the spirit would hide the medicine bottles. And at one point he looked, and there was only a vial with a smoky, dark liquid in it. And the spirit taunted John Jr. and said, "It's useless for you to try to relieve old Jack. I got him this time. He will never get up from that bed again. I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night while he was fast asleep, which fixed him." Meaning like, fixed him to die, not fixed him. So apparently John Jr. was horrified and threw the vial into the fire. Again, why are we trying to throw things into the fire? Like this happened with the family friend that tried to throw the pajama captured spirit into the fire, and now this vial into the fire. So like, I feel like you shouldn't do that. I don't know what fire does to entities like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you are supposed to burn things. I don't know. But he threw the vial into the fire, and it exploded in blue flames, which I think is such an interesting visual. And then John Bell actually died on December 20th, 1820. And even during the funeral service for John Bell, the spirit disrupted it by singing loudly, like singing extremely loudly, like drinking songs. So as I read about like the death of John Bell, it made me like think about three things. Like three things came to mind. One was that this ghost uses lots of sounds and illusions to trick. It sounds like this thing like just really liked messing, like psychologically torturing people. That seemed, it had other modes of abuse, but this was one of the main ones, it seems like to me. Another thing that comes to mind is that this is like a lot of anger for a missing tooth. Like if the first quote is true, like the first quote that was reported that this entity said is that it's like its grave was disrupted. That makes a lot of sense to me. That seems true. That's plausible. But like the fact where it's like, I'm in your house because I'm trying to search for my missing tooth. It's like, come on, dude. Like, please don't do this to humans that are on the Bell land. Like, please stop bothering people. But whatever. Over a tooth. I hope it was a gold tooth. I don't know. The third thing that came to mind is I'm definitely about to go down yet another rabbit hole about those blue flames, because I'm not sure if I've said it on this podcast before, but I was a chem major and bio minor in another lifetime when I was on the pharmacy track, and then like I got into a doctorate of pharmacy program, and then I hated it. So I switched my career completely into counseling psychology, and I love what I do, and I love the specialization that I have now in specifically with therapy. But anyway, that still means that there's like a part of me that is still very curious and really likes chemistry and biology. And I remember like a whole lab that I did where there were different elements that our professor had us do that we would put in like the Bunsen burner flame, and it would change the colors. And so this makes me wonder, like, okay, if the boy John Jr. threw this vial into the flames and it kind of like exploded into blue flames, that makes me wonder like what was in it. Like, I mean, maybe it was a total other like elixir or something, or like tincture, but like that's otherworldly. So I could be going about this like way too intensely with like a researchy brain, but like I really want to know what was in that vial. So I'm going to look up what makes blue flames, because I just want to speculate a little bit more, I think. Okay. So listen to what I just found out. Okay, so there are four things, whether it's an element or a compound that can change the flames blue. So the four things that popped up, the four main ones, and I'm sure there's more than just this. And also I believe that flames can become blue if they're really, really hot as well. So this is not the exhaustive list of things that can make fire turn blue. And then that's not even speculating on otherworldly concoctions that can do the same thing. But within the earth and the law of chemistry that we know of it now, there's indium and selenium. Admittedly, I don't know much about it, but these next two I do know a lot about, and I'm sure you do too. The other two so there's indium and selenium, and the third thing is lead. That's upsetting. And the fourth thing is arsenic. So maybe we just think about that for a second. Maybe we just think about how plausible it is that John Bell died of arsenic poisoning. Goosebumps again. This one really got to me. This one's really upsetting to me, because this is, the more like ties that it could be like for realsies of a story, like there's some kernels of truth to it, freaks me out even more. Oh man. Okay, so zooming out from the story, let's look at where the Bell Witch came from. And this is the part where it's pretty strange, because there's two places where people kind of suggest or speculate that the Bell Witch legend came from. One of them is from a woman named Kate Batts. And I'm not going to lie to you, every time I read her name, Kate Batts, I would read it as Kathy Bates, and it made me really freaked out because Kathy Bates did such an incredible performance as that super fan, if you even can call her that stalking fan in Misery by Stephen King. But anyway, she apparently had a public feud with John Bell regarding the sale of a slave. And honestly, this whole thing about the feud and the trade and the slave trading and stuff like that, this reminds me of an incredible book I've read this past year called Yellow Wife. It's by Sadiqa Johnson, or maybe Sadiqa Johnson. I'm not sure exactly. I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. But she wrote this really heavy and really powerful read. It's a historical fiction book that includes a lot of information about slave culture, survivalism, colorism amongst the slaves, and colorism that was pushed onto slaves by owners of other humans, and also like the culture behind slave traders themselves within like the 1%ers of America, of the Deep South. So but anyway, if you're interested in that is a good book to read with some information about that. It's just really intense and really heavy and sad. But apparently this Kate Batts said that she'd get him back, and that on her deathbed, it was reported that she was cursing his name and was mad that she was dying first, and that she would haunt him after her death. And all of this, though, was shown to be most likely untrue. And there were some parts of this rumor that are blatantly untrue. Like, it's just rumors. Like, maybe they did have a spat with each other. Maybe there was kind of some discourse between her and John Bell. But like, even just taking it, as soon as you actually look into the different parts of this rumor, it's like, it doesn't make sense. Because apparently, like, she didn't die until like way after John Bell died. Like way after, like 25 years plus after he died. I did see like a little footnote about how people who did think that Kate Batts was like haunting him or whatever, that's why they called it the Bell Witch, because of course we have to label any femme person who is spiteful or vengeful as a witch. That's so gross to me, but that's not even what a witch is, but whatever. So that's where kind of like this like public feud mixed with all of the Bell spirit legends kind of caused some people to call it the Bell Witch. Okay, that's rude and it doesn't make sense, but it does logically make sense as to how it got this title. The other thing that people speculate where this spirit came from was the Bell Witch Cave. Ghost hunters still go to the cave on the Bell property to this day and will try and pick up on energies. And apparently when like film, like before digital, when they did the whole like film pictures, it was reportedly very difficult to take pictures there. But the cave was never brought up in the original Bell legend. And they think it's maybe because it's the only thing from the 19th century when the Bell family, the original Bell family, was still alive and owned the property, that's like still remaining, because everything else, like the farmhouse and the barn itself, and like I think all of the slaves' quarters, they are all like nothing now. Like they've been razed to the ground. And apparently there was not any reports since 1828. Like there was a 7-year period where the ghost was like, the spirit was like, I'm going to leave and come back in 7 years. And it did. And then it said it would come back again, but it never came back again. So of this recording in 2022, it's been 194 years since there was any sighting or report of this particular malevolent spirit. So that is the story of the Bell Witch of Tennessee. There were aspects of that really made me think, and it also really scared me, obviously. Meanwhile, I'm just like researching in the middle of a thunderstorm, like completely scaring myself, but whatever. Several things I find personally interesting about this story is that, one, Dean's witch ball his wife made seems like the only thing that actually worked to fend off this malevolent spirit. So she honestly, in my opinion, is the true hero of this story. We had exorcisms, we had ghost hunters, we had witch hunters, we had like all kinds of attempts at trying to get rid of that. We shot at it, like I say we as if I was there, but like nothing fended it off except for this witch ball. So at least that's from my understanding of the reading that I did. Like that's the only thing that helped Dean, and like that's the only thing that kept this awful spirit away from harming someone who it clearly had been targeting more than the other slaves. Another thing that comes to mind is that it's very interesting that the spirit favored the mother and second born child and the oldest son in the family. That's still kind of rattling around in my brain. Like I'm not quite understanding what was going on. It definitely seemed like it was very flirtatious, and like fawning over the mom. And then it was very like, I almost want to say paternal, but that's not the right word. It was just very like engaged with the oldest son, John Jr. So I'm not sure what like was going on there. I don't know what to make of that. And I'd love to hear your theories on it. The last thing that came to mind, I mean, there were many things, but the last big thing that popped up in my brain is that an idea of an invisible entity that like tricks the senses is very bizarre. And the forms it seemed to take when visible was usually like dog-like. I think it was only dog-like. Like anytime it was ever seen by the human eye, it was dog-like. So I thought that was interesting as well. So those are just my thoughts. I loved researching this and hated researching this at the same time. If you want to sign up for, if you have your own theories, I'd love to hear them on Instagram, at Creepycore and Folklore, or you can email me creepycoreandfolklore@gmail.com, because this was like really fascinating to me. And thank you to Lauren for suggesting this, because I live in the US and I have a sibling that lives in Tennessee, and I still had never heard of this legend. So this was very interesting. So thank you so much for listening to me scare myself with this archival research. And I will speak to you next week. Thanks to all you spooky souls out there for listening to Creepycore and Folklore. Follow on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok if you're looking for more uncanny content. If you have your own tales to tell, you can email creepycoreandfolklore@gmail.com. If you liked this, please leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, or tell a friend who might enjoy these stories to spread the word. If you're interested in dark fantasy, check out my Hollowverse series. Ashes is available now in paperback and ebook on Amazon and audiobook on Audible, and the sequel is underway. I'm Iona Wayland, and I'll see you next time.